Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts on this very chilly Saturday night. One could also refer to it as Sunday morning. It's about 2:30 a.m. as I start this episode. A good friend of mine has referred me to the television show Fringe, and it's one of these shows that I'm sort of amazed I missed it, that no one talked about it. I was very busy in 2008 when it started. I was running my game company, so I wasn't watching a lot of TV. But my friend is she's one of my beautiful, brilliant friends who provides research data for me for scripts. But she was helping me with one of my sci-fi scripts I'm working on before I started this most recent project, which has caused everything to beautifully shift. She's like, dude, if you like all that stuff, then you're going to love Fringe. Did you like X-Files? I said, yeah. And so I'm tearing through season 1, excuse me. I guess I'm on probably episode 6. And it's covering one of these things, which is called Bilingual Aphasia. And it has to do with people that, this is not a core part of the episode, it's just someone mentioned it and giving examples, but then it, started to really pique my interest, excuse me, if I can learn how to speak English. I can't even speak one language. But it's when someone suffers an injury, goes into a coma. This has also been cited for near-death experiences where people are actually pronounced dead physically, and then they manage to recover, and something's different about them. A particular academic skill set suddenly appears, just immediately appears, and all I can say is there's different aphasias, right? Some people speak different languages with the proper dialect. You hear about this all the time. Sometimes people speak the same language, but they have a different dialect. Perhaps they're British, somewhere in the British Isles, they're speaking in some Australian dialect. And it's utterly perfect. It's not impersonation. People from those regions go, whoa, you're suddenly speaking a different language. But some of them, people have spontaneously gone from not knowing another language to speaking German, Spanish, French, everything. And it's always sort of, it's one of these things that we can barely wrap our mind around. But we hear it. We hear the words and we see the evidence. The last woman I heard of, I believe, was speaking in a British accent. If I have it right, she was in Texas. Something happened to her. She woke up and she all of a sudden had a British accent. Now, I love personally attempting a British accent. I think I use it in humor and that sort of thing, but I'm completely making it up. These people don't. Now, every other skill is in this game as well. Painting, piano playing, instrument playing in general. And we can only assume that there are other skill sets that are perhaps not being tracked as closely. Perhaps someone learns engineering or computer science or something just clicks differently in their mind. Now, there's a completely different species of this, which I'm going to acknowledge so that we stay on track with what I'm talking about. But there's a whole other situation when people get organ donations from other people. And when they recover, some skill set from the person who delivered the organ will suddenly appear in the recipient. The only one I've really seen that's fairly well documented is a person who received a child's organ of some sort. Can't remember exactly which one. But then that person all of a sudden was artistic and was drawing pictures, and the way that the documentary spins it is that the kid had drawn a very similar picture before the child died. And so it was like, hey, let's draw together. You got part of my organs, So I am not going to talk about that in this particular episode. I'm talking about the more mysterious because there's no transfer of materials between two people. There is no other person. This is just a person who had either near-death experience, well, probably near-death no matter how you turn it, because the coma is obviously not some normal state we are in this world. So I started thinking about this, and I'm going to tell you, it's because of this show, because of doing 450 episodes, that my brain has a college in it to decipher what I think this could be, because I feel like through us working together, me making shows, your thousands and thousands of comments, the Facebook page, which, by the way, guys, I just got a compliment from the Facebook page. A friend of mine went in there and said, you know, I'm a member of your Deep Thoughts page. I guess this person didn't have any expectations. Why would you? And she said, this is a great page. These people are so nice and so interesting and open-minded. So kudos to you. And let me just do a little advertisement right now. Our Facebook page, which is locked, which you get through deepthoughtsradio.com, just click Facebook under social media or whatever. It is just the finest group of people. I mean, I'm blessed to be, you know, a part of you, and your information feeds into me, regardless if I ever have a chance to give you an intelligent reply. I try to like things, and so you know I've seen it. And if I'm pounding through a bunch of likes, it doesn't mean I'm not diving in. It either is something I've already seen or I've dived in. So I do the same thing with the YouTube comments. So if I haven't liked your comment, it just means I've seen it and I haven't had a chance to really read it, because I want to really give you my full engagement, right? Okay, back to the episode. So I'm thinking about this. You know, there's a couple avenues my mind personally went down when I heard about people suddenly learning new languages, learning new dialects, and that sort of thing. And I think because of Hollywood, there was a brief second in my mind that thought of sort of a possession algorithm. And believe me, I understand if you did not have that impression. That somehow, you know, maybe the person did pass and whoever's taking over their body is from a different region and they're just adapting to whatever and whoever this person is. That'd be interesting. You just claim to have amnesia until everyone teaches you who everyone is, and you get a whole new lot in life, you know. But I don't think that's it. When I thought this up and connected the dots in my brain, which this particular time around, especially because I'm watching Fringe, which really forces you to open your mind. Fringe is a word used by the designers of the show to discuss fringe science. And unlike X-Files, which started off really solid with one theme and then wandered away from it, right? It was trying to do sort of a alien spin towards the beginning, which I think, you know, is masterfully interesting. I think the writers probably figured out, oh my God, we got to pull this thing through for a whole season and to do another one. We're going to have to branch out. Fringe, which is led by J.J. Abrams and some, all I can say is other brilliant writers and brilliant actors. I mean, really, this show is just one of those magic shows that, you know, I guess it went from somewhere around 2008 to 2011. And then the fans were like, what? It's over? And now, all I can say is, if the momentum of this show continues to the last season that I'm going to get to watch through DVDs, I will also be going, what? You know, how could you possibly drop such an amazing production? But I'm putting together these dots in my mind. I'm thinking, but wait a minute. These people are still themselves. They just have these new capabilities. Now, the episode in question was about a boy, it's all fictitious, who was in an accident, was in a coma, and woke up and could play the piano. And I have definitely seen half a dozen instances in my lifetime where just even the local press, when I lived in the Midwest as a kid, they would, you know, show kids walking up to pianos and playing. Blind people, they've never had any lessons, just start playing and singing. But now, I'm going to take you to the platform by which I'm going to start my little experiment in my college, because Science has, usually two different processes that you use in order to evaluate a hypothesis, right? Using scientific methods. You either have pre-existing paradigms and thought processes that you believe are true, that are the foundation of which you're going to jump off on, or you have a completely blank slate because you've never seen what you're about to try to figure out, right? Those of you who watch the show regularly, I talk about reincarnation. I talk about the fact that the way that that's possible is that we are a symbiotic being. We have a soul, a body, and a mind. The body is the facilitator of the mind using the Kraftwerk, the power station, which is our soul. It is pushing through this apparatus, of which has limitations. The human body has limitations. There's only so much we can access and accomplish in this human body, meaning I can't, as far as I know, fly around like, Superman. I can't just go out into space and stand on the moon. I can't just go to the bottom of the ocean without a suit on. Limitations. Now, whether or not we truly have neural limitations and thought process limitations, I think that's probably true, but it's probably way higher than what we currently perceive. And be careful with this ridiculous notion that we only use 3% of our brain, and sometimes you'll hear 10%, and be careful. The metric by which that is being measured is the same kind of metrics they use to create crazy political polls, where pedophile Joe Biden can somehow be ahead of Donald Trump in the polls when he's not even ahead of Warren. It's those kind of things where they can create a little thing that's good for a cover of Scientific America or whatever, but it's completely just conjecture and assumptions. And so allow me to give you my own conjecture. The reason why people fear death, in its ultimate sense, not just, hey, I'm young, I don't want to die. That's different. That's just self-preservation and something you should definitely have. But death in the layman's mind, which is all of us when we begin, is that we are just this bag of chemicals. And therefore, when the bag of chemicals dies, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, we recycle. And, look around your world, everything recycles. Even though trees live a long time, eventually they do pass away and they become the earth again and reconstitute. Every precious metal that we make can be recycled. Glass can be recycled, all these things. So we see this beginning, middle, and end cycle around us constantly. So it seems as if the universe itself has that same limitation. As it is above, so too is it below. And so as it is below, so too is it above. The only problem with that is that we are definitely energy. We know that for a fact. But the problem is that energy is typically defined in this universe as electrons. That's what we recognize as energy. Even though photonic waves can stimulate valences and create solar panels, it still turns into electrons, and that's what we think of as power. So if I were to tell you you have a soul, the problem is I can't tell you what it's made out of. But you can feel it. All right? Your number one piece of evidence about the soul's existence is love. But you do have to have a healthy body to bring forth enough of your soul's recognition into this world and control of this body to be able to feel love, empathy, and be a human being. But if you damage the human body with vaccinations and drugs and just birth defects in general, you will have a kazoo instead of a trumpet. And therefore, when you play, it kind of sounds like an instrument, but it's not something you want to listen to for any length of time. So even though we can create zombies here on Earth, that are killers or whatever. And there's, every time there's a tumor in the brain, all kinds of wild stuff happens, right? Well, when a piece of electronic appliance breaks, like a computer, a laptop, or your phone, and you accidentally walked off with the cord plugged in and it yanked the power connector on your adapter, or you do it to your phone, you plug something in and out a lot in your telephone, you break the connector, that's the reason why it doesn't work. But the interesting thing is also in your mind, even as a layman, without knowing anything about the bowels of a computer, that the internals of your computer are 99.9% correct. You just broke the connector. This will get to the point of aphasia. So when I tell you have a soul, and you could name people that you think don't have souls, serial killers, weird, dictators in life, there may have been something wrong with their body, such that the full dimensionality of what was offered by the soul was incapable of fully animating into the human condition. And so we have a killer. We have someone who hurts animals and children and that kind of thing. They are defective. Now, I do believe that there are situations where abuse can occur, and it will heavily dictate how the paths in the brain form in such a way that even though your soul is trying to push through, trying to give you the human condition, you've now built a device that is essentially short-circuiting for emotional reasons or maybe even neurological reasons. I've never heard it done, but imagine we were to study at a really microscopic level the neural net of a child that was abused badly by a parent, and then someone who seemed to live a wonderful life and become a wonderful person. I'm willing to bet that the neural density and the way that the synapses are connected are drastically changed. And because we program our bodies to become whatever we believe ourselves to be through neural peptide production, which means your neural thoughts construct a peptide that descends into your body and controls the way that you grow. You've got friends that can eat anything they want to eat, and they never get fat. But their sister or their brother with the same exact genetics turns into a blimp. Now, maybe you can see them eating a lot more, but a lot of times they don't eat that much more. And the skinny as a rail, I have a friend of mine who's as skinny as a rail. She's a model. I've seen this girl eat more than me. Now, I haven't tracked her to the bathroom to see if she throws up and stuff, but I really doubt it. She'll go hours and hours after she eats in public with us, and there's no, excuse me, I need to go, and, it smells like barf later. Never seen that. It's simply because they think of themselves in the form that they are. As I said a few times in previous shows, I went back to my reunion, high school, 30th. Can you believe that? And everyone in the room that looked 10 years older than everyone else had a very interesting consistency and common denominator, and that is that they walked around with a bunch of catchphrases about how old they are. They really embraced age. And so their body pushed them out 10, 20 years ahead of us. And even though we're the same age, roughly within a year of each other's lives, they look like grandparents, physically. So if you believe in some sort of soul, and you're willing to accept the fact that it's not going to be something that's tracked by a Geiger counter or a voltage meter, even though the human body is an electrical device, of course, hopefully we can come to the general understanding that if you injure the human body, you start to create defects in your personality and your capability of being human. And the way I would describe that is, if your body was entirely healthy and never got damaged, what kind of human could you be? And then who are you now? And have you damaged anything? Now, luckily, a lot of damage that we do, especially with drugs and alcohol, which is the same fucking thing, that can be repaired the once you stop. As I said in my alcoholic episode, If you've been an alcoholic for 20 years, be very, very careful going cold turkey, because you can create thicker blood that doesn't flow through your body. You can have catastrophic organ failure. So you might need to wean yourself off. As crazy as that sounds, you may literally need to just drink less and less and less for probably 5 years for every 20, right? I'm just making that up. But there's a relative, if you will, not a blood, that I was very close to for several years, and she died at 53 because she cold turkeyed her 25-year, 30-year addiction to alcohol. She was eating great. She had lost about 80 pounds. She's about 5 foot. And she ended up dying of catastrophic organ failure. So how do people learn languages overnight? Especially due to a coma. Well, now imagine, if you believe in a soul, which is a very scientific thing, it's not a religious thing. Religion is a paradigm by which we can actually discuss souls freely without having to listen to, atheists, shut down the conversation because they can't hear it. They don't have a machine that's been invented to track it. They can't fathom it, which is such a pathetic mind, isn't it? Philosophers do a little bit better because they sort of stand in the mezzanine of what could be. And you will have theoretical scientists who stand directly in the center with the philosopher, which I would assume is probably our group. But at some point in the growth of a human being inside of its mother, this living being gets a heartbeat very, very quickly. This consciousness, this soul, is obviously attaching to this cluster of cells at some key point, whether it's the moment of conception or some further cell count down the line. We don't know. But imagine you are this super infinite soul. Again, we might all be one being, and these are just tree branches that are growing into various instances of life which we perceive as human. But if you can't see a soul, you can't see the tree branch. But just think about the physics of the Fibonacci pattern and the fractal patterns of, again, the branches match the arteries in your body, especially the arteries that feed your lungs. And when you pull them out separately and look at them, they look like tree branches in the sky, Same thing. So perhaps through some sort of central consciousness and a fractal branching system, we are all the same person. But it's attaching to this small cluster of cells which doesn't have the operating system just yet of the entire human being fully grown. It's in the protein patterns that you get from your parents that then start to dictate to the DNA what's going on. You start creating yourself as a human being. Now, imagine that because we are a soul, you can't kill it. It's like trying to kill a ghost. You can't do it. You swing and your arm goes through it. It's looking at you like, what are you trying to do? Same thing with the soul. Because unless you have a soul bump into a soul, you don't have what it takes. And God forbid science has to acknowledge something that it can't track. I mean, wouldn't that be phenomenal? I'm pretty sure the high-ups in the world know that all this is true. Whether or not they know exactly how it works, who knows? But so you're growing slowly into this vessel that's also growing. Well, if it's having a previous life in England, Germany, France, Spain, Middle East, China, whatever, it was something else, and it fully grew into that thing in the previous life. And it did learn the other language. But now, because the vessel is tiny, we're now growing into a new branch, a new life being. And of course, what's going to take place? Maybe babies cry because they still see their old self and they're letting go. Who knows? But they're growing into this being that's inside the mother for 9 months on average, right? The baby doesn't have this capability of holding on to all of the neural programming and connections that were in the previous experience, because one, it's all disconnected. It's got to find its way, and it's only going to turn on the part of the soul that is necessary to live in this world. Why would turn on anything else? As a child, do you need to play the piano to feed off the mother? No. You need to be able to suckle. And so it's going to be this cerebellum muscle memory growth to be able to be a baby. And then you're going to crawl, and you're going to walk. You're going to walk badly, and you're going to walk better, so on and so forth. In terms of language, it's probably one of the most phenomenal things that we as beings can do, especially human beings. There's language, obviously, between all creatures within their own species, right? Ants talk to ants. A beaver talks to a beaver. But the articulated phonetical language construction and understanding, ciphering and deciphering of English language or any other language on earth is utterly phenomenal. Utterly phenomenal. That makes us superior to what's on this planet. But we learn the language of our land to survive. I had to learn English to live in America, even though I grew up in Germany. I do have a weird disposition for German. I can understand it in about a week of being around German people. I can understand 85-90% of what they're saying. It's a weird thing. But let's say you grow all the way up. Let's just give ourselves a hypothetical case. It's a 25-year-old female. She is, for all intents and purposes, perfectly healthy, speaks English, and she gets injured in such a way that she goes into a coma. It could be a fever, it could be a car crash, whatever. She loses her normal consciousness and ends up in a sort of perilous situation of, is she going to make it, that sort of thing. But they put her in a coma to help her heal. And when she wakes up from this coma, whether it be 24 hours or 24 months, she's speaking either a different language or she's speaking her language in a different dialect, which is very distant from where she grew up indigenously, right? What could be happening there? Well, let's say that in that state of injury, the soul is losing compatibility with the body for a brief time in such a way that even though it stays connected in a symbiotic way with the being, potentially through the brainstem, through the pineal gland, it does free itself a little bit from its predisposition of how it is hanging on to the body, meaning it is organically grown into the brain cavity of this gray matter, right? All this cholesterol that's making up my gray matter in my mind. But then I start to recover. And perhaps the reason why it lets go of certain cells could be one of two things. The cells themselves are dying due to whatever fever or injury is taking place, and so it has to find a new home. Or maybe there's a state of the brain, of the cellular structure, an electrical state, maybe it has less electricity, who knows, that it ends up being less compatible with the touch points of its previous organic 25 years of mapping onto this human host for the symbiotic identity that is the true person, who has potentially lived as many lives as the universe has years of existence. And quite frankly, there's no limitation to have been beings in other dimensions of reality as well. But we'll stick with our universe for now. Well, imagine that. Imagine that your soul is much more educated and infinite than you presently are as a human being. There's all kinds of theories about when you pass as to whether or not all that knowledge comes swimming back to you and you suddenly gain, a few million points on your IQ score. Or whether or not you maintain your identity. Are you still Walt Disney living in the park as Walt Disney? Do you have super Walt Disney, where he's Walt Disney by choice. He's living there by choice, but he also knows, the dinosaurs didn't exist. But now it's going to reattach. And now it has a super dense brain to work with, as opposed to the embryonic stage of attachment whenever that occurs. And so now what can happen is that it can organically say, well, I need to be able to speak when I wake up. So the parts of the soul that have knowledge about how to speak, well, they can just reattach wherever it's compatible. Now imagine if you've ever played, musical chairs. There's a very interesting analogy here. My grandmother on my father's side loved musical chairs. One, because she knew that any man that was playing the game will always yield to a woman, because she grew up in a time when men were men and women were women, and chivalry was the name of the game. So she knew that she could stand next to a guy and he's always going to give up his chair to my grandmother because she was very beautiful and sweet, and so they just do it. So she played that game too. It's hilarious. She's such a feminist. But imagine that this reattachment process is a bit like musical chairs. And for those of you who've never heard of musical chairs, you've only heard of it, you have no idea how it's played. They put a circle of chairs in a room. A bunch of people stand around the chairs. They play music. And while they're playing the music, you walk around the chairs. But when the music stops, you have to sit your butt down in a chair. And there's always one less chair than the amount of people walking around the circle. So one person's out. Then they stand back up again, remove one chair, meaning one person's going to be out when the music stops. And you have to fight for a chair. And it goes all the way down to, I guess, one chair, right? I have a memory of watching my grandmother play that. And I think my father even said, oh, yeah, there she goes. She loves that game. It was one of those things because he had seen it his whole life. And I was like, really? Let's see Grandma kick some ass at some chairs, right? Imagine that the remapping process of the soul sometimes, not all the time, most of the time it doesn't do this, right? But maybe the neural pathways that handle language and the soul's proximity to those areas, because something has been damaged due to the injury. The old British circuits, let's just say this person wakes up speaking a British accent, it's closest. And so it maps down to the brain. It maps down to the identity of this person. And so they wake up and they speak another language. Or their language in a different dialect, right? It's because in a previous life, they spoke a different language. Now, it's easy just to say, well, yeah, of course, you were French once, and so, yeah, if you get injured and you wake back up again, then boom, you're going to, have a chance of speaking your previous language. That's what I'm saying, but I'm giving you a physical model that is fairly interesting. Now, what about skill sets, like playing the piano? There's a couple versions of this that I have seen. One is exactly like I said, an injury happens and someone wakes up with a skill set they didn't used to have. That sounds like horrible English, but I guess that's correct. But then the other one I've seen probably more often, and I've seen it several times, is there will be a mentally disabled child in a household. And they may actually have other ailments, but sometimes I've seen it with blindness as another unfortunate disadvantage for the child. And for a large part of their childhood, there's nothing. There's care. There's hospice, right? Taking care of the child every turn of the way, right? And then at some point, I've seen it in the teens, late teens, and I've seen it in the 20s, where the child simply goes up to the piano, and obviously it's a household with a piano, so there's obviously probably genetic capability being passed down to the child, so the neural net of a family that is a bunch of musicians will pass down a predisposition to understand keys and octaves and tempo and music construction, right? But the child will simply play anything that they can hear. They'll write their own songs. It's just a light switch that turns on inside their mind. Well, anyone that's familiar with these situations of brain damage due to accidents, you'll know the mind is an amazing thing, right? And technically speaking, I should say the brain. When I'm talking about the mind, I actually, I'm not purely talking about your thought process. I'm talking about the physical synapses in your brain. We know that when it gets injured, over time, it can reconstruct and move things around the mind. There's, a couple conditions where they actually physically, deliberately take out half of your brain. And you lose that opposite side of your body's movement for a little while, and then boom, all of a sudden, one side of the brain takes over for both sides of the body, and they're back in action. It's an amazing thing. Thank the Creator, okay? But now imagine that the soul plays a bit of a role in this. You do have a past of playing an instrument. I want to suggest that unless souls are, and there's definitely evidence for this, unless souls come in really young with very little experience, which again, we see that, and we also have souls that come in that are very old. Like my kid, I swear to God, she's way older than me. When she was born, she's looking around the room as a baby. I mean, just minutes old. Just looking at all of us like, hey, what's going on? I'm going to be on mom for a little while. But everyone has that saying, the kid has an old soul. Imagine that this child that was born with several limitations at birth is obviously interacting with the world. And of course, the more the world is a loving world, they have the encouragement to become whatever they could become. And so they have a very healthy arc of physical growth. Well, the brain keeps growing and renewing cells to the day you die. You will hear scientists tell you that your brain stops growing new neural cells at the age of 10 to 12. It's a complete lie. Probably was initially told out of some false conclusion. I think today, because they poison us so much in our lives, they want you to think that your brain doesn't create any new cells. But because of cancer research and a few volunteers that were in a terminal condition who allowed themselves to be dyed, this black dye they'll inject into the mind, it stains all of the cells that exist with the black dye. So that if you ever create a new cell, it's clean. They have the oldest case I've heard, which is the oldest volunteer I've ever heard, is 79-year-old male, was dyed, and then lived a little while, and they did the autopsy on his brain and found all kinds of brand new cells in this guy's head. 79 years old. I think he got the shot at like 78. Every case this has ever been done throughout time to all ages, there's brand new cells in a mind, in a brain. So that occurs. I read a paper about how they don't know why a synapse procreates. I've told you exactly why a synapse procreates. Now, the rest of your cells in your body are very different. They're like suitcases, and your synapses are these sticky little clusters of nuclei that then have these sticky branches out to all the others, and they're transmitting electrical current back and forth, which is your thought process, right? That much we can all agree on. I'm going to tell you right now, never read this in a paper, but the reason why your synapses procreate is because of use. There's a threshold of use that triggers procreation. Synapse gets used a lot. It's like I'm being overstimulated. There needs to be more of us in this cavity because this person is thinking a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to eject part of my nuclei out into the space of the human brain, and then we're all going to work together to donate the cellular tissue to create a protective coating around it, and then attach to it. And everyone's attaching and attaching and attaching. So the more you use your brain, the more you get brain cells. That's just how it works. When you take a race in the world and you oppress them for 400 plus years, you're going to interrupt their natural ability to create cells unless in the midst of oppression, they're trying to think their way out of it. And that can create an abundance of super dense brains, which can do all kinds of wild things, right? Once released from oppression, you got amazing music and art and culture and all kinds of great stuff, right? One of my greatest fears is that the faction of the world that always seems to pick the biggest, douchebags to run the world is that they have this philosophy, well, if we made the world great, we have no more art. Well, Trent Reznor said as much about his first 2 albums, right? So these kids that are having issues mentally are still trying every single day. They're trying every single day to be normal. They don't want any limitations, It's like the people that are born without a particular limb on their body. There's these, I forgot what the disease is called, but there's the disease where or a condition, I don't know exactly what the medical category of it is, but they're born without arms. And you'll see how the women can put makeup on, and they never had arms, so they don't miss them. We feel sorry for them, but they're like, whatever, watch my feet go. And then there's that incredibly intense condition where you're born without arms or legs. But these people figure out a way to get around it. They won't be stopped. But their brain is obviously working at a higher level than most of us because they're having to figure out how to do, the most complex things with the most subtle nuances of their body. Because they don't have as much of a body as the rest of us, right? So for a kid that's got all of his limbs, he's got everything, he or she. I've only seen boys do this in the coverage. I'd be interested to see a girl who's done this too. Usually when it has the specials with the people without the arms, it's usually a girl that I see. There's a gentleman without any limbs, and that was a guy, and he runs around talking to kids, which is awesome. But here's my theory with this, and it's probably not even remotely profound to any one of you, but as the brain continues to repair, if the soul has any element to these spontaneous talents that these people have, right? It's as if one chamber of the the brain tissue that has been incompatible with soul attachment for whatever reason. It's not fully developed. There's not enough of it, meaning everything that could possibly be attached to has been attached to, but there's not enough of it so that the kid has a bit of a mental disability. But as they grow more of their mind, more of their brain, I keep saying mind, sorry, more of their brain tissue, there goes the soul. Ting, 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 and attaches a bunch of stuff. But because the kid's bigger and has a much larger brain than the systemic brain that you get when you're an embryo, they're able to onboard whole additional programs of how to do something very complex, like play the piano. It's all there. Bam. This is what you used to play, but if nothing else, here's what you used to know how to do, which is to play by ear, which is what I do. And these kids that are blind, think about Stevie Wonder, who I guess was able to see up until about the age of 5, and then he had a degenerative problem in his eyes. But I don't know how much he could play at 5, but the guy learned how to play everything he touched, still doing it to this day. I think Ray Charles was actually blind from birth, but so that you can do it. So there's organic growth learning, which is perhaps Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, who are feeling it and listening to it and learning it. You just let it roll into your brain. Again, if you ever want to learn an instrument, my advice is to obviously buy the instrument, but 2, have it close to you at all times, have it in your hand at all times, play it as often as you possibly can. Hopefully you're younger without a spouse. and you will start to just understand the neck of a guitar, the octaves of a piano. You know, once you understand that an octave is your fixed note range, and then you're just simply going up and down the octaves, and then you can start seeing key patterns, and you're in A, you're in B flat. You mean you're playing in a particular organization, you just omit certain keys and you pay attention to other keys, and no matter if you're high or low, those are the only keys that you're allowing yourself to play. Because when you play one outside the key, it sounds horrible. It sounds like a minor key. It doesn't work right. I've talked about the soul several times on the show, and I think I even mentioned, I know I mentioned in one of the episodes way back, that one of the things we're lacking is our Deep Thoughts College, a physical place to go with a bunch of open-minded people with not only the more tangible areas of science where a scientist could use machines and confirm things that we all have as capital S science, the religion of science, but also the other side, which is the more ethereal, theoretical science that we are trying to pioneer. And with the soul, we have a difficulty in tangibility. When you start to come on board, what I'm just going to call now like the soul train, okay? When you come on to the soul train and you believe in one, then okay, so you start to analyze your life, you start to analyze indicators that make you believe that, because most of us come to that conclusion at some point in time because of various experiences. Those of you who are extremely empathetic and loving, you have no problem believing in a soul. Whether or not you can articulate a single sentence about what it might be, besides a religious gift from God, you feel it. But then there's a lot of other folks that would love to start triangulating through deduction and experience, and perhaps in this particular case, a bilingual aphasia, science. Empirical evidence that goes, whoa, you know Kung Fu all of a sudden. How the hell do you know Kung Fu? I don't know. Foop, fop, foop, fop, foop, you know. But people gain skills really fast. Now there is the, I'm probably going to get the number wrong because it's been about a year since I researched this, but there's something about the, isn't it like 37 grams? Something like that. A doctor claimed, and I read about this later, and you know, you never know when you read scientific follow-up papers about, you know, interesting theories and claims, whether or not the debunkers are merely your classic scientists that are like, no way can that be true, right? But there was a scientist that thought that after a human body dies, he wanted to weigh it while it was dying and see if it changed its weight as a result of death. And he came up with, I think it's 37 grams, sounds like a lot, but it's some number of grams where you lose your bodily weight. He said he recorded that at one point. Now, obviously, if that was a bona fide experiment, then we could recreate that over and over and over again. Hospices could have beds that weigh you at all times, which they probably should, since they need to know how much you weigh. You just get the bedding differential off there, like, you know, the comforter or whatever, which is probably infinitesimal. And then they could test such a thing. Now, when I heard this, it was sort of it was a buddy of mine that said, what do you think about that? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he explained it to me, and I was like, oh, that's weird. But for me, the soul having a tangible weight in this world is sort of funny, you know? It would mean that you would, I mean, maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe I'm being silly, dismissing it, but I recently heard, on this subject, I recently heard someone say, I can't remember where the hell I heard this recently, but someone was trying to say that when we shake our head and we get dizzy, they obviously blame the little tendricles in our inner ear and the chemical that's down below, right? And if it splashes around and gets on the little tendricles, then you start to feel dizzy and vertigo and that sort of thing. I personally don't do too well when I'm spun around a lot. I don't do the teacups, as it were, right? And maybe it's something I would get over if I went through it a few times, but when I was a kid, I was on this swing in my hometown, and this guy had his kid there, and he spun us around, and I must have had chili or something because, boy, I got sick really fast and hurled on the ground. And suddenly I realized, oh boy, I can't go in circles. And so, but I can go in the barrel ride, you know, where you get pushed up against the edge because my orientation's okay. But this individual recently said that that's a bunch of crap, that inner ear splashing is something they tell you to explain it, but it doesn't really have anything to do with it. And I forgot what he was saying. He was saying it was a deep neural experience. I think this was a VR guy or something. If you guys remember or have seen that, let me know. But it would be utterly fascinating if our dizziness is merely the soul going, whoa, I've got mass, you know, on one level. You can't sense it unless you weigh your whole body. But, you know, here I am trying to hang on to your head. But if there was a very fascinating thing that kind of dawned on me a few years back about the idea of the soul being tangible before I heard this Graham experiment. You know, we have drag race car drivers, top fuel drag race drivers, and we have fighter pilots, and there are all these experiments, but drag racing is great. You know, you have a guy that is sitting and a girl sitting inside their car, and it's stationary. It's absolutely holding still to the degree any human being holds still in this world. And then they punch that thing when the carousel drops, and kaboom, this car is reaching 320 miles an hour in a second or two. It's just top fuel drag racing for me. It's just one of the most phenomenal achievements of man. It's unlike, to my understanding of a lot of the salt flat things, you know, where people go really fast. That seems like a more gradual buildup. But the soul, if it exists, has a definite way of attaching to the human body in such a way that even though we come to sharp stops, we have fast takeoffs, you don't lose your soul. You don't leave it behind. You know, you're not like, who am I? Oh gosh, I'm me. You know, it's not like that. It's pretty well attached if it exists, right? You know, I told you once that I had a dream that where I woke up and I was a tree. And I was a tree, man. I had no limbs. And the whole thing was I was dreaming that I had hands and arms and, you know, legs and stuff. And then I woke up and I was a tree. And I couldn't move. And it was like I was on this ridge with probably like a 10-foot drop down to the other trees. And we were all pretty unified in our distribution. Not quite like someone planting an apple orchard or something, but it was pretty unified. And there was like a green mist kind of going around. And I woke up and as this tree within my dream, and I said, oh my God, I'm a tree. And like the trees next to me were like, somebody said next to me, yeah, we're all trees. And we dream about being humans because we're trees. Meaning, we really wish we could move around. We really wish we could, you know, have more adventure than this sitting in this one place. And so, of course, we dream of being humans. I thought that was beautiful. But what if it's a metaphor? What if it's a metaphor for the fact that we're all tree branches from a central consciousness in the universe, and those branches reach out to us? And when they bind with the human flesh, we get our consciousness. Now, before you think that's crazy, think about an ant colony. Ant colonies are, by any definition, as well as bee colonies and other insect colonies, hive-minded. They work together. But an ant colony is interesting when you see that sort of nature video where they have ants that are in the rainforest, and the rainforest floods. And so these ants who are living on the surface climb up to a high place, whole brood of them, right? And they form a boat out of their bodies. And the ones down below use water tension to create a bubble around themselves. So their butts are sticking up and there's a bunch pushing down. So all the ones down below, they don't drown. They've got water tension and bubbles around them. And the queen is loaded up on the raft. A bunch of them climb on top of her. And you have this crazy hive mind boat that just instantly forms as if it's an amoeba going, or it's like a squid or an octopus, just trying to climb out of a dangerous spot and move on. When you draw a line around the entity that is an ant brood and then flood it and then continue tracing the line, you start to get what looks like a multi-celled being that lives on its own. And if we think about the fractal of the branch analogy against the soul, penetrating some sort of life, what's always fascinated me is we like to say that the size of a brain dictates the overall potential of the life that possesses the brain. Now, I've said it 1,000 times. Octopuses, if they're 50 feet long, have a brain about the size of my pinky and it's hollow. Well, how small do you think the brain is of an ant? Right? But ants can build underground palaces with rooms that are dedicated to breeding, rooms that are dedicated to saving food, rooms that are dedicated to the queen herself. When people pour aluminum inside termite mounds, they get this amazing, gigantic network of rooms. Same thing, slightly bigger insect. But ants do the same thing. And, depending on where you live in the world, you will either have gigantic bullet ants or you'll have the most tiny, microscopic ants. And when I grew up in Kansas, we had a particular black ant that had soldier ants that were utterly microscopic. Like if you were to say, I would say if this cigar, which is about, for those of you coming on the podcast, is about 2.5 inches long. Okay. I guess it's about 4 or 5 centimeters. The soldier ants had these gigantic bodies and gigantic heads with little pinchers. Those things compared to the soldier ants were, I don't know, it would be like taking a Tonka truck, a toy dump truck you might get from a department store, and parking it next to your family car. There are huge differences in what they were made out of. But their brain cavities all seem to work together. When the rain comes, they all just get on the same page really, really quick, which begs the notion, could there be a multi-life being on Earth, especially before man may have arrived on this planet, and the way that it's just worked, the way that it had to work, otherwise it wouldn't have survived, as a neural net, which in the other dimension is nothing more than a sort of an octopus-looking extension of a single soul. Haven't you ever met anyone that you're just totally compatible with? Lovers like to throw around the word soulmate. Whatever you do, you're just compatible. It's crazy. And it's like finish each other's sentence thing. It could be best friends, it could be lovers. But when you finally meet someone that's just, God, I feel like I've known you my whole life. What if that's nothing more than the branch off your soul? And what if that region of soul branch has been dictating souls around you and around them your entire existence? And so even though you may wake up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, all of your family and friends are part of the same tree. It's a little absurd because, families break up and move all over the world. Now, the one experience I haven't had is, moving to another country or having someone from another country move to me and having that unbelievable connection. I have met very few of the 7.5 billion people in the world, so there's nothing conclusive about that. And quite frankly, sometimes the opposites attract, which is where you get the yin-yang theory of existence, right? You can complete yourself in different ways by not providing the same exact faculties, right? it's a hell of a thing to suspect that you're a symbiotic being made up of soul, body, which then generates the mind, not understand it, but have this definitive feeling that that is exactly what you are. Isn't that bizarre? I can't understand what I am. You know, there's a level of which you can conceive of it, but you can't really understand it completely because there's no device that will allow you to see exactly the components that you are. It's almost as if, you know, and there's probably millions of people like this, but imagine never looking under the hood of a car. You never look underneath the car. You never know your entire life. Let's say you live 80, 90 years old. You never know what a car's made out of, or up of, however you want to phrase that. Yet you use, through the ignorance is bliss formula, a car. I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing, actually, if you can just let go. I will tell you this, if you're born with the engineering gene, this is an extremely difficult thing to accept, because an engineering mind has one controlling idea, which is, I must know how this works. No matter what it takes, I've got to understand it. And it has to be understood in a physical model. You might be able to survive with theoretical models until you achieve your physical model, but you're always searching for it. And it's that thorn in your side that you can never turn off, that curiosity. It's like, come on, what is this? Oh, yeah, you know. If you, at any point in your life, suspect that we are created by a divine being that wishes us well, then the curiosity gene, which is also, you know, it's a blessing and a curse, would be necessary for us to remain in a growth pattern, to negate the notion of sitting in some sort of stagnant state. Because what would be the point of creating us if we were just to sit there and go, I exist, this is great, you know. We need more than that as human beings to be satisfied, right? And, you know, you might cite ideas or cite examples where you're like, well, I know someone who's never left their hometown. I mean, physically never left their hometown. It's a small hometown. They're in a loop all day long. And so they don't really have that diversity in their life, but they seem to be happy as a clam. I would say that having grown up in a town exactly like that, I mean, I would spend months and months and months. I remembering when I was a kid that there were years that I never left my hometown, which is a 6 mile square, okay? You begin to appreciate the nuances of life, the subtleties of life. A conversation with someone is just as unique as a snowflake. Even if you do end up discussing the same thing every single time you get together, it's still the tone of their voice, the attitude of their body, that gives you that rich feeling of, oh, well, I see that they're still happy. And that's what I really want from them. And that makes me happy. And so today I'm having a happy day because everyone around me seems to be positive. Oh, someone lost a relative due to old age or whatever. So now they're in that other state of mourning. And so I'm going to lend my perspective and my love to supplant their pain. Subtleties. That's what's so utterly brilliant about the design of this reality that we're in, is that it is a fractal in itself. Emotions are a fractal. They're macro and micro. They're quick and they're slow. Sometimes we find ourselves locked into a state of mind for a perpetually long time, and we wish we could change it, you know. I want to hear what you guys think about this, and I'm going to encourage you to give it some thought. I mean, if you're having a super deep thought, comment away. But if you're just feeling something and you're mulling it around, give yourself some hours, some days perhaps, and come back and give us some of your insight into this. And I know a lot of you are well-read and well-researched in this particular category of thought process. You know, you guys refer me so many great links, so do that if you have those available as well. And also, any personal experiences that you've had that tend to give you the thought that you do have a soul. I mean, be meticulous, be surgical, physically surgical, theoretically surgical, obtuse, acute. Just lay it on me, man. And again, I want to encourage you guys before I go off on the bumper here. If, let's say you watched one of my videos 3 years ago, and it was one of your favorite videos, you may find it very enriching to go to the comment section, which at the time you saw it, because perhaps you're one of the first 50 people to see it, the comments were almost nothing, and go back and see if someone has contributed something really intelligent, because a lot of you are going back to my older videos and you're putting in these great comments with references to other videos, to individuals we need to look up on Wikipedia or other resources, websites, that kind of thing. And there is just, it is literally the virtual college that I keep talking about, except we don't have any money and machines to develop things, to do these sorts of experiments. But I think that, you know, like I said, the human mind and the human body is a machine. And we are the sensing device to have the authority on concepts like a soul. So instead of relying on a machine to track electrons and say, wow, this thing's got an energy signal, a radiation half-life that we're sensing through a Geiger counter by counting electrons that are flying into this sensor. Well, you're a machine too. You're way more complex than any machine man has ever made, including the Hadron Collider. So have faith in yourself to be able to find pretty much any evidence that you want to find. Do realize too that the universe is out there as your ultimate Wikipedia. It is. It has all the answers to anything that you can conceive, which is why enlightening yourself and opening your mind so that you can see more and digest more concepts. And again, this friend show is just like training wheels for that sort of mind expansion. There's a lot of things that will expand your mind. Hopefully this show has helped some of you achieve that, because you've certainly helped me. But the trick of getting an answer out of the universe is preparing the database query properly. You have to ask the question. Otherwise, you'll never get the answer. And there was a great episode of Fringe, somewhere in an episode, I can't remember, this woman who's the main character, she was talking to one of the other characters, and she was trying to say, you know, I need you to give me a bunch of information. And she says, well, I'll answer all your questions, but I don't think you have the questions. I don't think you can conceive of the questions, is what she was trying to say. That's brilliant. That's exactly the problem. If you can't ask the question, you can't get the answer. And even if you got the answer before you could ask the question, you may not understand what you're getting back. But the other thing I would encourage you to realize, potentially, this is my experience, is that you may get questions answered in very literal images, maybe even some words in your mind. But I need you to understand that metaphor and symbology is also a method of how the universe communicates. It is an iconology of communication. So you may get back an answer in a very symbolic form, and you need to understand that that's the way the universe is communicating with you so that you can decipher it and get the actual English or German or French or whatever you speak translated in your brain. And there are humans out there, and I know at least one that watches this show, and they are extremely symbolic when they communicate with other human beings, which they find extremely frustrating. And I'm not sure this particular person understands how symbolic they are when they communicate. And so they get immediately frustrated. And they'll want to shut the conversation down instead of going, okay, wait. You just started speaking your language. You understand there's no way I can know your language until you explain it to me. So don't give up on the conversation. Don't run away from the profound truth you're trying to share with another human being. Stop, take a deep breath, realize you're going to have to put some work in this, but the second that you can help us understand the symbology that you're speaking, then we can start having that conversation for the very first time that you never have with another human being. I think that's all I got for this episode. This one just crawled up my sleeve while I was watching Fringe, and I just had to get it out there. Now, if you've never been to the show before, understand a few things. It's a variety show. All kinds of different subjects. You're going to be interested in some, not interested in others. Don't sweat it. Just skip the episode. I'll have another one out within usually 7 days that may grab you. If you think you're subscribed to the channel, you may want to verify that on YouTube. If you like notifications when the episodes drop, which a lot of you do, click the bell. I will publish an episode, and I think nowadays within about 8 hours, the episode, if it's a good one, will get at 400 to 500 views within the first 8 hours, which for me is very, very quick for only 4,200 subscribers. Also, too, if you're enjoying the content, but you go out to the real world and you're like, oh my God, nobody talks like this. I really would love to have more conversations like this. Well, the best thing you can do is pass the show to them. And maybe don't do a hard sell. Just say, look, I want you to listen to this particular episode, and then let's have a conversation. Let's go to dinner tonight after you've heard it, because I want to pick your brain. That's another way of getting them involved, and then you can start having your own deep thoughts over dinner, over lunch, or whatever. But deepthoughtsradio.com is the place to go for all the feeds. There's a couple video. Again, if you're not on BitChute, please get yourself on BitChute, create an account. Even if you prefer to watch things on YouTube, show them support by subscribing. And just understand that when they want to raise money, they have to show their user count. That's how they have equity in what they're doing. So if they need money to expand without giving them any money, just giving them a subscription really helps the business model. Just keep that in mind. But there's 2 podcasts, so go to the device you want to listen to it on, visit the site, hit the podcast link, boom, it'll hook you up. There are 2 primary social media with Minds.com. I'm not sure Minds.com is going to survive. It doesn't have much traffic. It's kind of a weird site, and they only allow 15-minute videos, which is really going to it's going to challenge their competition with Facebook, but it is a beautiful site. But the other 2 are Twitter, which I just post the feed on, don't do much else, and then there's Facebook, which is booming, but it's a locked Facebook group, which gives you a little bit of privacy from employers trying to see what you're doing. They can't see in the page. There are 2 direct ways to donate to the page, which is PayPal. And again, thank you for some of those who have donated recently through PayPal. Again, you're fully anonymous. I have no idea who you are, so I'd put you in the credits if I could figure that out. But Patreon is a monthly thing. You can put like $1 and you put 99 cents in a month, I think is the smallest one. But what that gets you is early access to at least 90% of the episodes. Again, sometimes you're going to have days of episodes. I put one up there that is strictly for Patreon people. The other 2 are affiliate programs I have, but there are 2 products I really believe in. One is the Brave. One of them is the Brave browser, which cuts off all the surveillance from your searches. The 2 steps you need to do is download the Brave browser. Just go to brave.com. I got a link up there that supposedly if you go through that, I get some sort of credit. I've never gotten a single penny off that thing. But what it does is it shuts down all the ad trackers, and you can switch your search engine over to DuckDuckGo very easily inside the preferences. That cuts Google off completely. So the deep state gets their head cut off when it comes to your social profile online. Very, very important. By the way, I do not promote VPN software of any kind because I think it's all a hoax. VPN software, just to put this in your back pocket because I can't create a whole episode on it. It's very important for you to understand. VPN servers, obviously, you bounce through a bunch of servers and your traffic continually gets forwarded off by a bunch of servers that are supposed to have their logs turned off. meaning they have no idea who you are. Your IP address flows through, gets reassigned until your IP at the other end doesn't show up. Now, that will work for the recipient, usually, meaning they won't know who you are. That is true. But your deep state is setting up these VPN companies, and they're just watching you walk around the internet. You are not anonymous by any stretch. Even if they have the logs turned off, there's other ways they can log your data into other super servers, and so you're not protected. So that's why I don't believe any of that crap. You can use it if you want, but just use the Brave browser, and it'll cut off most of what's going on. So if you want to do that, just know it's marginal protection. But the other service that I use personally is called Backblaze.com. It's a backup software. $5 will get you 30 days of your drives fully backed up. It's infinite number of drives, 2 computers. So I have a laptop and a desktop. They're both backed up 24/7. But if you pay $2 extra, you get the other 11 months out of the year. This is something they recently changed that I forgot to mention. So I pay $7 a month, and I have probably 18 terabytes backed up on a daily basis while I'm asleep. Definitely get yourself a good internet connection at your house too. It's the upload that matters in that particular thing. For any of you looking for Season 1 episodes, they're not on this channel anymore in terms of searchability. They're still on, but they're unlisted because they all have all kinds of musical problems and copyright strikes and all this other crap. So I've remastered them all, and I put them on a separate channel as not to mess with all the numbering of this particular channel. So BitChute has it all in a beautiful line from 1 to whatever we're on. We're at 429 today. But if you want to see those, go to the website, click Season 1, takes you to the other channel. Just go ahead and subscribe unless you've seen all 100, and then just have it in your subscriptions when you want to run off and look at an old episode. They're not as refined as this format, but the content is really, really fundamental. There's a lot of self-improvement in the Season 1 from things, regarding, alcoholism, suicide, to how to get a job, how to be creative, how to do design, all those kind of things. So there's a lot of stuff in there that's really healthy for you guys, because you never know. You never know if you might have interest until someone talks you through it. But for all those of you who've stuck on forever, I appreciate you very, very much. Until the next episode, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.